Some people say the 1980s were a wasteland of overstyled, underpowered cars, all flash, no substance. They picture clunky dashboards, awkward wedge shapes, and horsepower figures that barely moved the needle. But buried under the neon paint and pop-up headlights were machines so smart, so ahead of their time, they made the decade's poster cars look like amateurs. Which of these forgotten marvels could have changed history if more people had paid attention? Let's dig into the ones that quietly rewrote the rules. Mazda RX-7 Turbo 2, 1987. When people think of the RX-7, they picture the sleek 90s FD model with its anime star curves. But the 1987 Turbo 2? That was Mazda's silent assassin. The company took its featherweight second-generation RX-7, already beloved for its balance, and dropped in a turbocharged version of their 1.3-liter twin-rotor engine. The result was 182 horsepower in a car weighing barely 2,700 pounds. On paper, that's respectable. On a twisty road, it was pure poetry. Mazda didn't just bolt on a turbo and call it a day. They reinforced the drivetrain, tweaked the suspension geometry, and added ventilated disc brakes all around. The steering was razor-sharp thanks to rack and pinion precision that put you in direct conversation with the road. Unlike many turbos of the era, the boost came on smoothly, almost seamlessly, so you didn't get that turbo lag punch that threw you off balance. In Japan, it was marketed as a refined sports car with a rebellious streak. In the US, it was overshadowed by flashier, more expensive imports like the Supra and 300ZX. Mazda's marketing barely whispered about it, and most buyers never realized it could go toe-to-toe with much pricier machinery. Even the interior was a step ahead. Deep, supportive seats, a clean driver-focused dash, and an almost obsessive focus on ergonomics made it feel more upscale than its price tag suggested. And then there was the handling. In an era when sports cars often sacrificed comfort for performance, the Turbo 2 managed both, comfortable on a long cruise, lethal on a back road. Today, it's nearly invisible in the collector scene, partly because the rotary engine's quirks scared off casual buyers. But for those who know, this was the RX-7 that proved Mazda could blend refinement with raw speed. It wasn't just quick for its time, it was a preview of the high-tech Japanese sports car revolution about to hit in the 90s. Peugeot 205 GTI 1.9 1986. If you grew up in North America, you probably never saw one, and that's the tragedy. The Peugeot 205 GTI was the European hot hatch gold standard, light, nimble, and almost telepathic in the way it responded to your hands and feet. The 1.9-liter version that arrived in 1986 took everything good about the earlier 1.6 model and dialed it up. We're talking 128 horsepower in a car that weighed just 880 kilograms. That's less than most modern subcompact cars, and with that low mass came agility that made bigger, faster cars look clumsy. The steering was alive in your hands, chattering away with every ripple of the road. The gearbox had short, satisfying throws, and the suspension tuning walked a tightrope between comfort and cornering brilliance. On a tight country lane, it was unbeatable. Motor journalists of the time described it as dancing through corners, and that wasn't just poetic license. The front end bit hard, the rear rotated willingly, and it rewarded smooth, confident driving with a rhythm that felt almost addictive. This wasn't a car you drove fast for the sake of speed. It was a car you pushed harder because it kept whispering that it could handle more. Unfortunately for Americans, Peugeot pulled out of the US market before the 205 GTI could make the trip across the Atlantic. Over here, we were stuck with heavier, duller hatches, while Europe was enjoying what many still consider the best hot hatch ever made. The 1.9 became a cult hero, winning comparison tests against more powerful cars and earning a reputation as the ultimate backroad weapon. Today, surviving examples in good condition are highly prized in Europe, but in the US, they're almost mythical. Import one, and you'll quickly discover why it still has such a loyal fan base. It wasn't just brilliant for the 80s, it's the kind of car that proves lightness and precision will always beat brute force. Ford Sierra RS Cosworth 1986. This wasn't just a Ford with a wing, it was a wing with a Ford attached to it. The Sierra RS Cosworth was born for one purpose: to win races. Ford wanted a Group A touring car champion, and they knew they needed something wild to pull it off. Enter Cosworth, the legendary engine builders, who took Ford's humble Sierra shell and turned it into a motorsport icon. Under the hood sat the Cosworth YB engine, a turbocharged 2.0-liter four-cylinder that pumped out 204 horsepower in road trim. That might not sound earth-shattering today, but in the mid-80s, it was enough to terrify anything in its price range. The power delivery was pure turbo theater. Nothing, 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 and then a sledgehammer hit at around 3,500 RPM. But the real star was the aerodynamics. That massive whale-tail spoiler wasn't there for show. It generated serious downforce, something most road cars of the era barely thought about. The flared arches, wide stance, and aggressive nose all had a purpose, and it showed on track. In its first year of racing, the RS Cosworth dominated, instantly becoming the car to beat in touring car championships. On the street, it was raw and unapologetic. The ride was firm, the steering heavy at low speeds, and the turbo lag meant you had to plan your moves. But once you learned its rhythm, it was addictive. It felt alive in a way few cars do today. Every corner was a conversation, every straight a dare. The tragedy? America never got it. While Europe embraced the Cossi, US buyers were stuck with lesser Sierras sold as the Merkur XR4 Ti. Those were fun, but they didn't have the Cosworth's magic. Today, the RS Cosworth is a holy grail for enthusiasts, both for its motorsport pedigree and its outrageous 80s attitude. This wasn't just a Ford that happened to be quick. It was a competition-bred monster hiding in plain sight. Toyota MR2 Supercharged 1988. The original Toyota MR2 was already a revelation. Mid-engine layout, lightweight, and handling so sharp it could embarrass cars costing twice as much. But in 1988, Toyota decided to give it a shot of adrenaline. They bolted a Roots-type supercharger onto the 1.6-liter 4A GZE engine, bumped output to 145 horsepower, and created one of the most joyful driver's cars of the decade. On paper, that doesn't sound outrageous. But here's the thing. The MR2 SC weighed under 2,400 pounds. Combine that with a short wheelbase, quick steering, and instant torque from the supercharger, and you had a car that felt like it was hardwired to your reflexes. No lag, no hesitation, just immediate response. Toyota didn't stop at the engine. The suspension was retuned, brakes were beefed up, and the car sat on sticky tires that made the most of its mid-engine balance. The supercharger itself had a magnetic clutch, so it could disengage under light loads to improve fuel economy, something even modern performance cars sometimes skip. Driving one was an event. The supercharger's whine mixed with the engine's growl. The short-throw shifter clicked through gears like a precision instrument, and the whole car seemed to pivot around your hips in corners. It was playful, but never sloppy, quick, but never intimidating. The problem? It arrived just as insurance rates for sporty cars were spiking, and the MR2 SC wasn't cheap. Many buyers opted for the less expensive naturally aspirated model or jumped ship to bigger, flashier coupes. As a result, production numbers stayed low, and the car faded into cult status. Today, finding an unmodified MR2 SC is a challenge, but those who have one guard it like treasure. It's proof that Toyota, when they wanted to, could build something as soulful and engaging as any Italian exotic, just in a package you could park without breaking into a sweat. Volkswagen Scirocco 16V 1986. The mid-80s were a golden time for European hot coupes, and the Volkswagen Scirocco 16V was one of the best, even if hardly anyone in the US remembers it. The Giugiaro-designed body had already been turning heads since the 70s, but by 1986, VW decided it needed a heart transplant. Out went the milder engines. In came the 1.8-liter 16-valve four-cylinder from the GTI, tuned to 123 horsepower. Now, 123 horses might not sound like much, but the Scirocco weighed barely over a ton. That meant a power-to-weight ratio that, combined with tight gearing, made it feel far faster than the numbers suggested. More importantly, the chassis tuning turned every drive into a masterclass in balance. It wasn't just about speed, it was about flow, about connecting one corner to the next in a seamless rhythm. The 16V came with a close-ratio 5-speed gearbox, 4-wheel disc brakes, and sportier suspension settings that gave it a confident, planted feel without punishing you over bumps. The steering had that classic VW precision, direct, communicative, and light enough for everyday use. Inside, you got deeply bolstered seats, a driver-focused dash, and just enough 80s quirk to make it charming. In Europe, it was a hit among enthusiasts who wanted something more stylish than a Golf GTI, but just as capable. In the US, it was overshadowed by the cheaper GTI and the flood of Japanese imports offering more horsepower per dollar. Sales were modest, and by the early 90s, it was gone. Today, it's one of those cars that, if you spot one at a Cars and Coffee event, you stop and stare. It's not just nostalgia, it's recognition that this was a beautifully balanced, driver-focused coupe built in an era before everything became bloated and overcomplicated. The Scirocco 16V didn't shout for attention, but for those who knew, it never needed to. Subaru XT6 1988. Even in a decade full of wedge-shaped oddities, the Subaru XT6 managed to stand out. It looked like it had rolled straight out of a sci-fi storyboard, razor-edged bodylines, pop-up headlights, and an airplane-inspired cockpit with a digital dash that made you feel like you were flying the car rather than driving it. But the XT6 wasn't just a styling experiment. It was Subaru swinging for the fences on engineering. Under the hood sat a 2.7-liter flat-six, unusual for a compact coupe at the time. With 145 horsepower and a broad torque curve, it delivered a smoothness you didn't expect from Subaru, a brand then known more for rugged wagons than futuristic GTs. The XT6 also came with full-time all-wheel drive, making it one of the few sporty coupes of the era that could grip confidently in any weather. And then there was the party trick, hybrid steering. This was an early variable assist power steering system that adjusted effort based on speed, giving you a light, fingertip feel at parking speeds and a weightier, more planted response on the highway. The suspension was another standout, an electronically adjustable setup that let drivers switch between softer and firmer damping at the push of a button. Unfortunately, the XT6's brilliance was hidden under its unconventional looks. Buyers didn't quite know what to make of it, and Subaru's marketing didn't help. Was it a sports car, a grand tourer, a winter warrior? It was all of those things, and that confused the heck out of the 1980s car-buying public. Today, it's rare. Partly because Subaru didn't sell many, and partly because Rust claimed a lot of them. But those who have driven one will tell you, the XT6 was Subaru showing it could innovate in ways even the big brands couldn't match. It was weird, wonderful, and far more capable than people gave it credit for. Pontiac Fiero GT 1988. For most of its life, the Pontiac Fiero was a case study in unrealized potential. When it debuted in 1984, the concept was exciting, a mid-engine, two-seat American sports car from a brand best known for muscle coupes. The reality? The early models were heavy, slow, and saddled with an economy car suspension. And then there were the infamous engine fire headlines, which tanked the car's reputation. But in 1988, just as Pontiac decided to kill the Fiero, they finally got it right. The last year Fiero GT was a completely different animal. Pontiac threw out the old Chevette-derived suspension and replaced it with a fully independent setup designed for sharp handling. The steering was quicker, the brakes were bigger, and the chassis balance finally matched the promise of its mid-engine layout. Power came from a 2.8-liter V6, making 140 horsepower, enough to push the lightweight coupe from 0-60 in under 8 seconds. More importantly, the V6 sounded the part, with a throaty growl that made it feel faster than the numbers suggested. The 5-speed manual gearbox was the preferred choice, making the most of the engine's usable torque band. Visually, the GT had matured into a sleek fastback with smooth lines that still look striking today. Inside, it was pure 80s, squared-off gauges, chunky switchgear, and seats that were more comfortable than they looked. The tragedy? By the time the 88 GT arrived, the damage was done. The bad press from the early years overshadowed the car's massive improvements, and Pontiac pulled the plug after just 6,148 GTs rolled off the line. Today, the 88 GT is the one Fiero that enthusiasts hunt for. It's the car that showed Pontiac could have had a true mid-engine sports car, rivaling the Japanese and Europeans, if only they'd gotten it right from the start. Honda Prelude C4WS 1988. Four-wheel steering sounds like a gimmick until you drive a Honda Prelude C4WS. Launched in 1988, this was Honda at its most forward-thinking, packing advanced chassis tech into a stylish front-wheel drive coupe. The 4WS badge meant that the rear wheels could turn in the same or opposite direction as the fronts, depending on speed, dramatically improving both agility and stability. At low speeds, the system turned the rear wheels in the opposite direction to the fronts, effectively shortening the car's wheelbase. Parking, U-turns, and tight corners suddenly became sports car sharp. At higher speeds, the rears turned in the same direction as the fronts, creating lane change stability that felt like you were gliding rather than swerving. The magic was that it all happened mechanically. No computers, no electronics, just an ingenious arrangement of gears and shafts linked to the steering rack. It was reliable, seamless, and way ahead of its time. Under the hood sat a 2.0-liter four-cylinder with 135 horsepower, paired with Honda's slick-shifting 5-speed manual or a 4-speed auto. The Prelude wasn't the fastest coupe on the block, but it didn't need to be. The handling was so precise and confidence-inspiring that you'd swear it had more power than the spec sheet claimed. Inside, it was pure Honda. Great ergonomics, supportive seats, and a sense of build quality that made rivals feel cheap. The styling was equally sharp, low, wide, and sleek, with just enough 80s flair to stand out without looking cartoonish. The problem was that most buyers didn't understand four-wheel steering or why it mattered. It added cost to the car, and while the Prelude C4WS was a marvel for enthusiasts, the average shopper went for cheaper trims. As a result, sales were modest, and the 4WS system faded from the market. Today, those who've driven one know it was one of Honda's greatest driver's cars, a reminder that sometimes the best innovations aren't the ones that win the sales race, but the ones that change the way you feel behind the wheel. Alfa Romeo GTV6 1981-1987. The Alfa Romeo GTV6 is one of those cars that makes you forgive 1,000 sins the moment you hear it. The culprit, a 2.5-liter Busso V6, one of the greatest sounding production engines ever built, smooth, sonorous, and with a metallic rasp that made even a grocery run feel like a lap of Monza. But this coupe wasn't just an engine with a car wrapped around it. The GTV6 had a transaxle layout, meaning the gearbox was mounted at the rear to help balance weight. Combined with rear-wheel drive and a well-tuned suspension, it offered near 50-50 weight distribution, a rarity in the 1980s and a godsend for handling. In an era where most affordable coupes understeered into corners, the Alfa wanted to dance. Power figures were modest by modern standards, with 150 horsepower on tap, but the way it delivered that power made it feel alive. The throttle response was sharp, the steering communicative, and the whole chassis seemed eager to work with you, not against you. Inside, you got deeply bolstered seats, quirky Italian ergonomics, and gauges that looked like they were borrowed from a small airplane. Build quality. Let's just say it was inconsistent. Electrical gremlins and rust were constant threats, but the payoff was driving a car that felt exotic without needing a lottery win. In racing, the GTV6 proved its worth, dominating touring car championships and showing that Alfa could engineer a world-class driver's car when it wanted to. Sadly, in the US, Alfa's reputation for fragility overshadowed the car's brilliance. Buyers who didn't understand it stayed away, and the ones who did often learned to love their mechanic almost as much as the car. Today, the GTV6 is a cult classic. Get a good one, and you'll find a car that rewards every mile with involvement and emotion. A reminder that sometimes the best cars aren't the most reliable, but the ones that make your heart race. Maserati Biturbo, 1981. The Maserati Biturbo might be the most misunderstood car of the 1980s. It's remembered for reliability nightmares, but in concept, it was far ahead of its time. A twin-turbocharged luxury coupe that brought Italian style and speed to a much lower price bracket than Ferraris or Lamborghinis. The heart of the biturbo was a 2.0 to 2.5-liter V6, depending on market, with, as the name suggests, two turbochargers feeding it. Power output varied, but the European spec cars made as much as 205 horsepower, and thanks to the turbos, torque came on strong in the mid-range. When everything was working, it delivered smooth, rapid acceleration that made rivals sweat. Inside, it was pure Italian luxury, plush leather seats, wood trim, and a dashboard that looked handcrafted rather than mass-produced. The ride was supple for a sports coupe, yet the chassis could handle spirited driving with poise. For the time, the biturbo's combination of speed, comfort, and price was unmatched. So what went wrong? Build quality, rushed development, and inconsistent dealer support. Electrical issues, turbo failures, and rust-plagued early cars, and word got around fast. By the mid-80s, its reputation was in tatters, even though later versions fixed many of the problems. Strip away the horror stories, and you see the blueprint for what would become standard decades later. Turbocharged power, compact luxury packaging, and everyday usability. In many ways, the biturbo predicted the modern sports luxury coupe trend before BMW and Audi perfected it. Today, clean examples are rare, but can be bargains if you're brave. Get one sorted, and you'll have a car that blends Italian flair with technology that was downright visionary for its era. Dodge Omni GLH S, 1986. Leave it to Carroll Shelby to take a humble economy hatchback and turn it into a street weapon. The Dodge Omni GLH, short for Goes Like Hell, was already a hot hatch sleeper. But in 1986, Shelby unleashed the GLH S, with the S meaning some more. Under the hood sat a turbocharged 2.2-liter four-cylinder, cranking out 175 horsepower. That doesn't sound huge today, but remember, the Omni weighed just over 2,200 pounds. The result, a 0 to 60 time of 6.7 seconds, making it quicker than many V8 muscle cars of the time. Shelby didn't stop at the engine. The suspension was upgraded, the brakes were stronger, and the tires were sticky enough to embarrass sports cars in the twisties. The GLHS handled like a go-kart with a grudge, darting through corners with minimal body roll and a level of grip buyers didn't expect from a Dodge hatchback. Inside, it was still basic. No leather, no fancy wood trim. This was a driver's car first, commuter second. The only real giveaway that you weren't in a regular Omni was the GLHS badging and the boost gauge on the dash. That stealth factor was part of its charm. Production was tiny, just 500 GLHS models in 1986, which makes them rare today. Most were driven hard and put away wet, but the survivors are now sought after by enthusiasts who understand that this was American hot hatch brilliance at its peak. The GLHS proved that you didn't need a big engine or a big budget to build something fast and fun. You just needed the right attitude and a little Shelby magic. Nissan Pulsar NX SE 1987. In a decade where carmakers experimented with bold ideas, the Nissan Pulsar NX SE might be one of the strangest and smartest. On the surface, it was a sporty little coupe with a T-top roof and pop-up headlights. But look closer, and you'd find something unique. A modular rear end that lets you turn it into a hatchback, a coupe, or even a quasi-wagon. Nissan offered multiple sportback panels you could swap yourself. Want more cargo space? Bolt on the wagon-style hatch. Want a sleeker look? Go back to the coupe lid. It was a Lego-like approach to car design that no one else dared try at the time. Power came from a 1.8-liter twin-cam four-cylinder, making 125 horsepower in SE trim. With a curb weight around 2,400 pounds, it wasn't blisteringly fast, but it was peppy and fun, especially with the slick-shifting 5-speed manual. The suspension was tuned for agility, and the steering was quick enough to make city driving a joy. The interior was classic late 80s Nissan, clear gauges, supportive seats, and controls exactly where you wanted them. The T-top roof panels popped out easily, turning the Pulsar into an open-air cruiser in minutes. So why did it fade into obscurity? Partly because buyers didn't quite get it. The modular design added cost, and most people stuck with whatever panel came from the dealer. Plus, the SE's performance was overshadowed by the era's turbocharged imports. Today, the Pulsar NX SE is a rare sight, and its quirky versatility has made it a favorite among Nissan enthusiasts. It's a reminder that the 80s weren't just about excess, they were about bold, clever engineering ideas that sometimes slipped through the cracks. So there you have it, 12 80s cars that proved brilliance isn't always loud or obvious. Some were ahead of their time, others misunderstood, and a few just too quirky to survive. Which of these forgotten legends should return? Comment below, subscribe for more deep dives, and keep searching for hidden gems still waiting to be rediscovered.